a very film way of compositing renders together inside of ZBrush, right? This is the quickest way, in my opinion, to do a render, and you can get pretty good results. So for now, if you go to the render tab, I'm going to double click on this divider so I expand my my UI here, and I'm going to dock the render. Yeah, or double click it and drag it over. Right. Yeah, so it would help if you if you want to follow along and grab one of your old files. This doesn't have to be a finished model. That's fine.
How did you hold it like that?
Yeah, there's a little arrow circle thing.
Yeah, click on render. Yeah, circle checker. Why is the renders in there? No, click on the render and it's little tabs.
You got it?
Yeah, you got it now.
Okay.
Where do I go to?
I don't know what is happening.
You said like the clay ones tend to be too good, like better than this.
When you're sculpting, it does, but when you're presenting, this is the whole point of them. Yeah. I mean, honestly, if you're sculpting, I really would just keep it to matcap, gray, or basic. That way, you're not cheating with like exaggerated forms from weird cavities from the matcap. But you know, basically, you know, Shift R is a hotkey to render. If I go up to this UI, I slide up. You get this BPR button, right? That's the same thing. So BPR stands for Best Preview Render. So you can hit Shift R, you can hit this button, you can hit any of these buttons, and it'll basically go through the process, right? If we look at what's going on here, you go into render properties. Render properties lets you control some of the extra options, right? If you want to turn on subsurface scattering, SSS, if you want to turn on transparency, if you got like a transparent material. Wax preview is also kind of a fakey subsurface look. Fibers, I think only if you're doing fiber mesh, but these we don't need to worry about too much because I'm basically going to boil this down to more or less like a few button clicks to make the process a lot easier, right? To do that, if we go to the BPR shadow pass here, the only thing that I recommend you change is BPR shadow and change the angle, right? Because let me zoom in on the head. I'm gonna hit Shift R, let it do its thing.
Shift R.
Yeah, Shift R. So with an angle of 0, the shadows tend to be really harsh. So if you look, say right here, this cast shadow from the hat is a really hard shadow. With this matte cap, and let's just switch it to a simpler matte cap. I think it'll be easier. So let's do this one. I'm gonna render that again. Hopefully this will give me a different look.
Which one do we use?
You can use any.
Pro? Well, we probably don't have that one.
I'm using a Zebra Clayset SL3.
Wait,
Yeah, so let's move this over. Oops.
How do I know if it's rendered or not? It'll process through.
Yeah, it'll process through and it should look different.
If it's rendered and then I switch the material, will it stay rendered or do I have to re-render?
You have to re-render it.
Okay, shit.
Wow.
All right, so I think this kind of shows it a little bit better. These harsh shadows here. I have a different matte cap on the skin, but I'm gonna kind of gloss over that and move forward. The higher your angle is, it's very unintuitive. The higher your shadow angle is, the softer the shadow is, right? It's not called fall off for some reason, but it's called angle. So I tend to change this anywhere between 30 to 40. If you go higher than that, it tends to get too soft, right? So if I do a Shift R again with this, let's kind of like look at this area and this area here.
Okay, so it's like creating a softer.
Is it like create?
Yeah, so now it's a softer edge to that shadow. Anything higher than this, it becomes like a little too vague. It's almost like ambient lighting, so I don't go higher than probably 35 normally.
Okay, so
And what does blur do? It's in BPR shadow.
menus.
Actually, wait.
It might improve how much blurriness or how much it tends, like how many pixel steps it take to blur.
Click on the little tab. I'll show you. Click on the little tab. Yeah.
Let me assign this here, make it all even.
So then
I think we're under properties, right?
BPR shadow angle
BPR
30.
shadow.
BPR shadow.
Change the angle somewhere out there. Okay, well. And
And then Shift R.
yeah. Make sure you don't have the number highlighted. I kept doing that.
Yeah. I wouldn't worry about these other options. Usually it's fine. I just change the angle here, right?
So this softens the.
That cast shadow.
Yeah.
The cast
This
shadow.
is nicer, I think.
So just to kind of be very comprehensive in this, if we go to the BPR render pass tab here, this shows you basically what the render is. So if I click on each one of these, it gives me the option to basically save a shaded, save a depth pass, a shadow pass, an ambient occlusion, if I have it on, and then a mask here.
Can you see those in real time, or do you have to just kind of look at the little thumbnail?
You have to look at the thumbnail or export them and then look at it in like Photoshop, right? So let's make this a little easier instead of having to save out each pass. If we go down to the Z plugin option here, there's something called ZBrush in Photoshop. This became integrated in R8 and above, so I'm glad no one's on R7. But these are the options I typically use. Right, I use AO, ambient occlusion. I use best. That's the best quality render. I don't actually think I need to use this, but I use it anyway. It's just like one extra layer of detail I can use. Oops. And then
Color bump, is that like your color in ZBrush?
I actually have no idea. Let's turn it on. Let's just turn it on. We'll see what it is.
Okay, so we click best.
BPR,
AO, BPR,
depth.
depth, color bump.
Yep.
Lights.
Yep.
OS normal.
OS normal is kind of crazy. Let's.
Oh,
Definitely
okay.
want mask.
Yeah, you want mask.
I got mask.
Polygroup ID is sometimes useful.
Why don't you just do everything except for the albedo and preview? What's albedo?
Albedo is the diffuse.
Yeah, it's basically a color map.
SSS, structure and subtool ID.
Yeah, basically what Val said. Just turn everything on.
What about the TS normal?
No, I wouldn't do TS normal. I wouldn't even do OS normal because it's kind of a complicated fake for me to do that. Well, I'll show you what it is, but we'll just hit send to Photoshop, right?
Yeah.
Let's simplify this, and
Photoshop.
send to Photoshop.
Does Photoshop have to be running?
No, it'll automatically open. If
Send it.
if it doesn't open for you, then there is a fix for that. It just means that Photoshop isn't associated with JavaScript, and we'll fix that if that.
Color bump.
Yeah, it doesn't look
The color bump render pass will
It's
look
doing like it's doing something.
the color bump render pass will look at the color information on your model polypaint link texture map and display it as a bump map.
Oh, that could be useful actually.
Basically, you know
This
the
pass
only
is
thing.
using the material located in ZBrush 4R8. You just overwrite the file if you want it to use a different material. Interesting.
Probably got that cold that I had.
No, I have a size.
That's fun.
After Effects opened instead of Photoshop.
Oh.
It's blue.
That's.
Good shapes.
My girlfriend is
I'm curious. Can you just continue with it? See what it does.
Mine's
I
also
don't even like
still,
understand the
so it
interface of
doesn't-
this.
Not supposed to.
this just showed up?
Yeah.
But those are your different maps that I just generated. So that color map you
They didn't
probably
even
saw,
import it.
that was probably color
There's
pop.
no application set to the
That
document.
was-
See brush
that's
Photoshop.
AO.
JS6. Search the abstract.
So what
Oh, no,
you
it's
can do
generated.
is.
It generated your depth map.
Oh man, it's in the back. How do I do this in the back?
Yeah, I'm not in the
You don't
same.
have any lighting.
Oh, I'm not
So,
in the same thing.
try
Okay,
it.
it's still doing stuff. So
Yeah.
it's just subtool.
So
I don't even know if I can export mine because
How do you want to open this file?
well,
Choose an existing application.
Oh, fine.
Can you point this to
Yeah, that's great.
Bang.
Photoshop?
Oh my god, it does it for you? Oh my god.
what does it do for you?
Oh my god,
You can pause everything.
Really?
it's happening.
Whoa, this is so cool. I got
How
that
did you
too.
show us? Is this new?
No, I showed it last term.
No, you had us render out. It's never sent to Photoshop. I remember that.
But yeah, okay, so I found out why it isn't sent to Photoshop. It's usually if you have multiple Adobe programs.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Like After Effects might overwrite the file extension.
Oh, okay.
So it sends it to Illustrator.
No, it just you had to open up each one separately and then like modify them.
Yeah, I did show you the hard way first. But
Yeah,
I learned
at least you
that
know how to do the hard
Aren't you
way.
glad you're hanging out in our class?
I like your hat.
You learn new things.
That's like taking model for game second time. I'm learning how to like model even faster, like chamfer modifiers and stuff.
I thought no. I was just gonna say. I thought last class when you were showing us the examples, I was like, oh, you are so organized. You did all this yourself, but it's really
I'm so like.
it does that for you.
Oh, I could totally do it myself.
No, I know you could probably, but
Wait, where's your channel?
it's a pain doing it yourself. So sometimes you have to do a few extra things on your own. But
Oh.
holy crap, it's taking a long time.
so many pieces.
Yeah, I probably had too many pieces for this.
There's your mask.
Wasn't really meant to work on this many pieces.
That sculpt is crazy.
The sculpt,
Yeah, I like it. It's
Thank
got
you.
So much detail.
it is all on a 256 texture.
I don't know what that means.
Wait, it's on a what?
This is a MOBA asset, so these are all like super tiny textures. So I'm just wasting my time, essentially.
So you did like a really like high fidelity sculpt that's going to be shrunk down. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, you see it on like this.
Are most
Oh,
small
that's
characters
cute.
made in 256?
Well, each texture slot on this, so he has I think 4 or 5 slots. So if you add it all up, it's probably about almost to 1K, a 1K texture. But each piece it gets pretty brutal. I mean, we're also talking about like 300 poly gauntlets that go on both arms. 300 poly helmet sometimes, you know.
Oh my god.
So you have to find out like really creative ways to fake things. But it's actually a good exercise because it shows you how much you actually understand about low poly games.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times I hear that poly count is too low, and most of the times there's a way around it. I probably shouldn't have turned on so many render passes. It's taking forever, but we'll see.
This looks really cool when it's all rendered.
I hope so. If it'll finish rendering. I guess what I should have done is I should have merged a bunch of these together, but it's usually I'm not thinking about rendering my sculpts out. Why is it going through this process again?
Gotta do it for each piece, I think.
Yeah.
This is a bad idea.
Mine took a while too.
Well, yours is already done. He started his before yours.
Can you fix my phone while-
Oh yeah. If you right click or let's see here.
Mine's like simple. I don't know. Like,
Yours is just as complex.
why you gotta bully me?
Yeah, I have literally a lump of clay that I rendered.
Are you serious? What
Supposed
do you
to-
mean a lump of clay?
It's supposed to look like one of those stupid tree houses.
Or you haven't started yet?
No, I mean
Did you start over?
So we change this. to
I'm serious. It's a serious question.
No, I
Now when you do that different things, you hit.
I'm doing like law studies, or not law, and getting into the head. swing of getting stuff.
That
Sign off on it.
What
Starting
did
to
you
stop.
say?
Nothing.
No, I just didn't know what
You
you
guys
were
can do
trying to say.
Wait, you said it's a lump? That's your study?
Yes. Here I get it.
Oh, you got it for it?
Yeah.
Okay. What the? Oh my god. What is?
I heard about the assignment you almost gave out.
The assignment, the one I gave out, the one that someone is probably regretting auditing my class.
Which one is this?
Yeah, we have to do like
character
80 silhouettes and what was it?
10 studies.
Yeah, it actually is 3 now.
Oh,
So it's
Wait, for in a week?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh well, then it was also making the insert mesh and then doing the kit bash monster
Wait, what do you mean silhouettes? Like in ZBrush?
silhouettes. Yeah.
also for the silhouettes, do you want us to do a 3/4 view or like
3/4 view is usually the best.
okay?
It gives the most information.
I don't understand how to do this. What do you mean a silhouette in ZBrush?
Like you render it flat.
Oh, like
We
it's
can
like,
we can do that next after this is done doing its thing.
No, I don't want to. It sounds hard.
Well, especially if you want to do 80 of them, I guess. Depending on how you do it, it's actually it's about as hard as you make it, right?
It sounds like it could be crazy.
well, if you're smart about
My
like
workflow in ZBrush.
reusing your shapes,
Yeah,
it might not be as hard as you want it to.
yeah.
My workflow in ZBrush is so slow right now, so it's like that scares me.
Well, maybe we should do that then. I think that will change your workflow.
No, it won't. The only thing that's going to change my workflow is by finishing this class with an A.
Not gonna happen, buddy.
So
I'm pretty sure I've told everyone that I think last class was probably the only time I'm going to give out A's, just because I feel like grades are unfortunately the only motivator.
yeah.
So I'm just going to make it really, really hard to get an A in my class.
Sounds good.
Oh, no.
I don't care about grades anymore.
Well, to be fair,
Yeah,
I didn't even get an A in your last class.
My mom's going to scream
Which,
at me.
you know, that's fine.
I only have 3 classes.
Alright, here we go.
But you don't
Photoshop.
tell her.
Holy shit.
Photoshop opened. I should have done the mask thing.
It's gonna take about another 3 minutes to load all the layers.
Yeah, you have like Maya, ZBrush, and Photoshop open.
On a surface, no less. So,
I'm surprised you things even running.
It's going to explode.
But it's only a picture of his head.
yeah. Alright. So that eventually worked. Let's talk about some of these passes. Subtool ID, right? So it's basically giving you, it's a cloud map. Every subtool gets its own selection mask, right? So I could, if I wanted to only select or do like a global change across all metal, I could do it right here. For those of you in game arts, this should be a very familiar process. It's basically doing a texture with where you can control specular, gloss, and all of that, but you're doing it on an image, right? The polygroup ID, that was excessive because I don't really need the polygroups. I don't know why I did that. That just wasted a lot of time. Depth map, this helps me do depth of field effects. I could also use this as a mask to say desaturate things that are further away from the camera. So this is pretty useful. The color bump, I guess I could overlay this to get a little bit extra detail, but we'll talk about that later. In the object space normal map, the object space normal map is useful because if I go through if you set up a bunch of adjustment layers, you can manually control the lighting on this, right? So let's say these lights that ZBrush gave me, the back left, right, back left, back top, maybe these don't cut it, right? If these don't cut it, then I can turn this into its own light source. There's a better tutorial I can point you to online that tells you how to do that. It's not the best though. I haven't had great results with this. I find it better to just manually do another render. But anyway, let's kind of go down here and best layers. So the best render is just like a very diffuse render versus the BPR render, which is a lot harsher. Like, which is better. I think what I tend to do is I will take the opacity down on one of them and kind of merge these two together. So I kind of harmonize those. I don't want like a very harsh render, but I don't want a very soft render, which is why it's useful to do it this way. Materials is if I had just assigned a different material here, say like this reflective material across everything, and I can render this out, and then that would pop up into this materials tab. But we can talk about that in a little bit here. When I'm using these lights though, I'm only really interested in the back, top, left, and right. But all the front ones usually are a little harsh. But I could, if I wanted to.
Can you drop the opacity on them?
Yeah, you could drop the opacity, right? Let's turn this to a normal. This is what came out of ZBrush, right? What it did was it assigned a basic material to your entire model. It rotated the lights to be like, 90 degrees on the right side, and it saved out a pass, right? So you're using these values to relight your model. And by default, ZBrush likes to put these on a screen mode. Screen works pretty well. This actually works for once. This front right, so I think I'll keep it. We can turn down the opacity a little bit. And then I'll just make a bunch of adjustment layers on top of this, right? I can do, typically I do like a hue saturation first. I turn it to a colorize. I clip that to that right light. So now I have like a colored light here. I could, increase this however much I want. The nice thing about the clay render, right? If you're just doing like a grayscale clay render, is that you could play with these lights and it's usually okay. You can go pretty saturated and it'll look alright. But once you do the, if you do like a poly paint render or like a final textured render, you have to be pretty careful about how saturated you make your lights. So we'll keep this for now. I'm kind of interested in seeing where this goes. I'll make a new adjustment layer on top of that, so I'll do the levels usually. This will, I'm trying to control the fall off here on this light, right? So if I clamp my values and then I clip that here, I can have a little finer control over how that color light blends down. And then we'll do like back left here. Back left might be like a useful rim light. And then I'll do the same exact thing. We'll do like a hue saturation. I'll do colorize. I'll do it like an opposite color. I'll make sure to clip that down. And so as a proper rim light though, this is a very diffuse look. So we'll do the same thing. We'll do a levels pass.
How does the back one get lit up like that? How is the back one getting or the right one getting lit up?
Because it's just like a light from the back side on the left side shooting out this way. So if I don't want that, so this is like the advantage of doing things this way is that I can, on this render here, I can start masking things out that I don't want to show.
Well, I mean, wouldn't that get shadow? I completely wrong.
I think a rim light would happen, but I don't have a proper rim light pass, right? If I wanted to do a proper rim light pass, I would, let's go to the, where's the beard? what I would do instead is I'm going to set this back to, say, like a basic material. I'll set this to like a dark color. And then on this light here, I'll double click on that.
Oh, that's how you get it behind.
Yeah, so that's how you get it behind. And from here, maybe I will do a render here. I'll hit Shift R. So these are custom renders, right? So once you hit Shift R, as it does this, it'll make a new pass here, and I'll save out each of these individually. So if I'm trying to fine tune the look of my render, like this plugin is nice and all, but it only gives you it's only giving you like absolute right, left, top, bottom lights, and that's sometimes not enough.
Is there any way to like save your camera angle so that you can always go back?
Yes, the easiest way is go to Document, and there's the App Link Properties. You want to hit Custom 1, and then you hit Custom 1. You go out, you do your thing, and then go back to Document, Z App Link, hit Custom 1, and you're back to where you are.
And there's no way to add like your own like small lights, like if you wanted to light like, oh, his eyes are glowing, or something.
Not in that sense. No, not in that sense. You'd have to fake it, kind of doing what I'm doing here, where you're rendering out separate passes, or you would paint it in Photoshop. Yeah. So I'll save this, and we'll do we'll call this like rim light. Or I'll just switch to this outline. Hopefully this one works. And then I'll change the light back. That. Okay, that's not working so well. I'm not sure. Or maybe it's because let's just see what that render did. This is not a very good render. I'm not sure if we can use this, but I'll try and see what happens. So I'll move this out. I'll turn this on the screen as well and see what this gives me. Yeah, that's not really doing the job.
This is like really cool.
I'm glad. Yeah, rim lights, they're a little bit trickier. I think you have to manually set the lights. Probably not setting it behind would work better. But from there, I think I'm going to fake it here, and I'll just essentially paint out some of these areas that I don't want it to affect. Why is my brush size not going? There you go. That kind of look. I'm gonna tone some of this down so it's not as obtrusive here. And then make it a little less red, a little less extreme, and I'll kind of play with the colors here on the blue as well. I'm not liking those, so I kind of keep it to those for now. And maybe I'll play with the top light to kind of give a little bit more of a top-down lighting. Maybe I'll duplicate those two the two red layers, I'll put that on top of the top light, and I'll clip those as well. And so now we're getting a little bit more lighting variety here. And before I move forward, I'm going to turn the effects on, right? So the effects is basically AL, you know, the ambient occlusion. It helps ground the render a little bit. Oops. The subsurface will turn off. It's not real subsurface. It's basically whatever is the outwards facing edges will get this Fresnel effect, right? So if I turn this onto that, this is not true subsurface. But I can use this to control like fabrics, right? So if I, for instance, under this poly, under the subtool ID, like he's got like this hat up top, which is like made of cloth. He's got these bandana things, and I think this is also cloth here. What I can do now is I'll mask that area. And then let's invert that, or there you go. We'll mask that, and then I'll turn off this kind of stuff here. And it's giving like a soft fuzzy look to those areas. This doesn't make as much sense in this clay render, but when you're doing like a final presentation of your model, that can help. And specular is basically taking a fake environment map like this, and then changing to screen and changing the opacity, right? So now I can control how shiny this material is, or this render is, just based off of this here. And then again, just like everything else, I can run a levels pass on that environment map so that the effect is stronger, right? So I'll run an environment map or levels on that. I'll tone this down, and if I really wanted to control where it hits the surface, then again I can mask out specific areas. So let's say I don't want it to happen on the cloth area. There's that, and I think the last one is using the depth pass, right? So what I do here is I turn on the depth pass, and with this selected, I'll select all of it, I'll copy that, and then in the channels, I'll make a new channel. I'll paste it here. So this is my new alpha channel. I hit Control A to select the entire canvas, Control Shift C to copy it, copy everything merged, and then I'll paste it on top here. So this is what happens when I want to like start doing more advanced effects here. This will, assuming this is where I want to go, you know, I basically copy a merge version of my projects. I duplicate that on top. So I have 2 copies of this, and then on their filter, if I do a blur and then do lens blur, I can pick the source, which is that alpha channel, right? So in that alpha channel, whatever is white is closest to the camera, and whatever is like gray or dark is furthest away. And then I can control here the focus distance.
And then if you wanted more in focus, could you also adjust that in levels?
Yeah. This is going quite slow. And so I'll do it very heavy-handed here, but so the reason why I have 2 versions is that so I can mask out those blurred things, so I can again further control or more finely control where things, like I want the face to be pretty much in focus here. So we'll do like an airbrush effect. It's pretty excessive to do this much depth of field, but when you're doing like creatures, it does come in handy, because then you have the entire body, you have like the limbs, and then you can add a little bit more of that atmospheric perspective here. But I mean, I probably wouldn't do it this far. We'll go this far for this kind of render specifically, but this is more to show you that you can do that.